So when we moved in, I put up all of these really nice cabinets and did crown molding around them to assure that we would definitely have enough storage space in our laundry room. But then apparently this happened, and I guess that's unacceptable. So making a simple storage unit was added to my honey-do list. I'm going to start by clearing out this area and taking some basic measurements just to kind of get a feel for how much space I have to work with. At this point, I still really am not certain if I'm going to end up making a regular cabinet, if I'm going to make drawers, what I'm going to end up doing. I like to kind of get an idea of my space and then have a night to overthink a project big time, which is what I did with this, and then ended up going simple. So we had all these gray little containers from our last house, and I decided, you know what, this is just going to be a simple storage, going to be behind a door. I can just build a unit for those. I'm getting the side pieces down to their final dimension, and then I'm going to just kind of look around and see what kind of materials I have for the back piece. And I come across this panel that I pulled out of a vintage camper a few years ago, and it'll work. So this is just proof of why I keep absolutely everything. Just kidding. Actually, I'm not kidding at all. I keep most materials, and I do end up using almost everything that I keep. Everything that I'm doing here could be done with a circular saw or simpler tools. I always think the very best way to start making things is to just simply start. One of the first things I ever built was a shoe rack made from old 2x4s, a hacksaw, and nails, and I actually kept that for years. So you don't need fancy equipment. And the only way to truly learn, in my opinion, is by doing. I learn something new with everything that I make. I am no pro by any means. I'm setting my blade height to just a little bit over 1/4 of an inch here. I'm just going to put a groove in those side pieces to hold that back panel. So grab my panel and I'm going to take a pass through. And then I'm just going to keep moving the fence a little bit, and I'll be running both pieces through here. I'm going to take a solid 3 passes, 3 to 4 passes on each piece to get to the 1/4 inch that I desire. I like to take very small passes. So then I'm just checking it out. I want a nice snug fit, but I want it to be able to slide in. So I'm sliding it into place, and looks like we got it. I cut a dado style groove in the bottom of the panels as well, and then I had to clean it up with a chisel because I don't have a flat blade at the moment. I have a combination blade. So it just is a little rough, but it's not a big deal to just clean it up. Next, I'm cutting down the bottom panel. And once I get it to its final size, I'm going to actually cut a groove in the base of it as well. So that side panel is going to fit, or the back panel is going to fit down both side panels as well as on the base piece. Honestly, this isn't necessary. For a simple storage container like this, you could just staple the back panel on. It would not have to slide into grooves and stuff, and it really would serve the function the same way. I'm going to put the panel into place so that I can mark out what the final height of it's going to be and cut it down to its final height. I find that the more that you can just directly fit things together and mark them, and the less that you actually spend measuring, the quicker and actually more accurate. So I'm trying to get this assembled, and it definitely was a bit of a challenge. I was trying to do this primarily on the floor and not on kind of my larger assembly table because I'm shooting this on my phone and just really don't have the ability to get a good angle up there on something this large. So it took a little bit of finagling and a little bit of frustration. But anyway, got it to fit pretty well. It's a little dry fit. Now we're going to get it set up a little bit more permanently here. I put a little glue in there. So these spacers that I'm going to end up inserting later are very helpful here on the top side, so I can get it clamped into place. I was able to flip it up and just kind of flip that clamp around. And then I'm just going to put the back panel, slide it down in through that groove. All right, moment of truth. Let's see how we did. Yay, it fits. Okay, awesome. So I'm just going to screw those pieces into place, and they're going to all be covered by trim. So I'm going to countersink them to make sure that there is, nothing left proud of the side panel. Here I'm attaching the back piece on with some brad nails. I'm just going to repeat this process all the way around the cabinet, top and bottom. I have some side rails here that I'm going to put some pocket holes in for attaching the top. I have this Craig Foreman, which is really awesome, and I bought it when I was making hundreds of holes for cornhole sets, but it's certainly not necessary. Any pocket hole jig would work here, and you wouldn't even have to do pocket holes for attaching the top. I'm gluing that side rail on, and I'm just going to clamp it in place before I run a few screws in there. And I'm just going to fight with my clamp a little here because I'm still a little bit nervous and awkward in front of a camera. Doesn't matter what kind of screws you use here. I'm using 1¼ inch Craig pocket hole screws. I just like them because they're self-tapping and I don't have to pre-drill the holes. Apply a little bit of paint to that inside back panel. The whole thing is going to be painted, but this obviously is going to take a few more coats because it's bare. So there's a lot of options for what you can do with a plywood edge like this. You can actually put wood over it. You could make a frame around the whole thing. They make a nice white melamine edge banding. That would make the most sense for this project. But again, I'm trying to just use what I have, and I happen to have black melamine edge banding, or I had oak. So I'm using an oak edge band here. And of course, I'm using my iron. My iron became a shop tool a long time ago, and that's pretty much all it's ever used for. So you're just going to heat this up and press it on into place, and then we're going to trim it down with a utility knife. There is a special tool that you can buy to trim this a little nicer and a little quicker, and I guess if you were going to do a lot of edge banding, that would probably be a good idea, but I try to rarely use the stuff. I'm just going to sand the edges a little bit here, clean it up, make sure that there's no sharp edges left. Next piece that I'm going to cut is the top, and I'm actually going to cut it just slightly oversized, and you'll see why in a minute. All right, so I have the slightly oversized top piece, and I'm going to just attach this with those pocket holes. So I'm going to start in the front by where the clamps are. That holds it well enough so that when I get to the second hole, it doesn't pull up, and by the time I get to the back holes, it's pretty well in place. You want to try to cut that top piece perfectly, you can, but by oversizing it and just using a flush trim bit, you get an absolutely perfect fit. Hand tools are the one place where I don't have any dust collection, so I try to clean it up the best I can as I go. If you've watched my other videos, you know that I like to use as many reclaimed pieces as I can. Another thing that I really like is when I find good cull lumber. And I picked up some of this MDF style trim from Home Depot when they had it in their cull section a few years ago. I just totally cleaned them out. They put this horrible purple paint all over everything, so you need to sand that off. You really can't hardly cover it up with enough paint. But anyway, I'm actually going to get into my last boards of this. It's taken me a couple of years, but they cost next to nothing. So, if you go to Home Depot or something frequently, that's another good place to look for materials for an inexpensive price. So I'm cutting down the pieces now. That is actually set at a 45-degree angle. It's kind of hard to tell with my camera angle, but I am mitering these. So the trim pieces that I am mitering for around the top would not have to be done that way. You could certainly just do them, as just straight boards. Mitered corners are challenging. I've been building things for quite a while now, and I still struggle with miters sometimes. So one big key is that you really want to try to sneak up on your line. So once you've marked your line off, don't try to cut it perfectly to the line the first time. All right, I'm frequently might take 3 or 4 cuts before I get it to the size that I want. So here I'm going to mark out a line of where I think I'm going to end up being. And I'm going to go over to the saw and cut it down. So it's still just a little bit long, so we're going to do another cut here. All right, so I've got the two sides to the right size, and I'm going to attach those first. And I'm just using 1¼ inch brad nails here. Had all those clamps up there because I had clamped all 4 pieces on to make sure that they would fit perfectly. So I'm going to put a little bit of glue here, make sure that I get the edges as well. And then I'm just going to go ahead and nail this on. I have found over the years there's been many times where I've taken a decent miter and I've made it into a bad miter joint by trying to get it absolutely perfect. So sometimes you're better off with being pleased with decent and then just filling it a little bit if it's not absolutely perfect. At this point, I'm just applying just a little bit of wood filler to every seam just to make sure that once I sand it, it is perfect. My least favorite part of any job is sanding, so we're going to go ahead and just give it a nice once over. I keep the filler nearby because, it's inevitable that you find a little spot that maybe you just didn't fill adequately. So I want to make this top look like, smooth enough that you can't tell the top piece from the edge pieces. I'm going to use the same trim for the bottom, and I'm just going to do the side pieces. And then I'm just going to give a slight round over to the front of it so that it has the same amount of round as the trim itself has. I happen to have the right bit in my router table, so I'm going to use that, but this would be just as easy to take your sander and just round it over real quick. You definitely don't need a router for this. For the bottom trim, I'm going to again just use a little bit of wood glue and 1¼ inch brad nails to attach this. Very, very simple. It doesn't take a lot to hold these on. So when I was given my instructions to build this unit, one of the requests was that this would be on wheels since it's right next to the hot water heater. So it's really easy to move in and out if we need to mess with the hot water heater at all. So I'm just going to use some casters that I'd taken off of my old dust collector. So they're, a little bit too big probably for this cart, but they're what I had. Flip this over and give it a little spin to make sure that it isn't tipsy. For the side rails, I'm going to take that same MDF cull trim that I had and I'm going to just rip it exactly in half. That's going to give me rails for both sides of each bin. As I alluded to earlier, measuring can be one of the fastest ways for me to screw something up. So I really like to use spacers as much as possible. And so here I'm just going to mark out a line with a piece of plywood and then pieces of trim. So basically there'll be an 1.5 inch space between each bin. Hit the side rails with a little bit of white paint. I like to do as much pre-painting as I can, particularly when there was still a little bit of purple on these, so that at the end I just have to give everything one final coat because it all has some paint on it. Well, the rails are drying. I'm just going to hit the cart with a coat of paint and I'll just kind of alternate back and forth until everything's been painted adequately. While the paint was drying, I cut a spacer block to be at the height so that when I put it on top of the plywood, it's going to go right to the bottom of where the rail should be. So as long as you do this part right, then putting these rails in is a piece of cake. So I already put in the other side. So we're going to go ahead and nail this rail on, and then you'll see how easy it is from here. All right, so I just put the next bin in, and again, apply that piece of plywood and the spacer, and I'm right in position. This is where I probably should have put the wheels on at the end. Oh well. All right, and then we're just gonna get the last set of rails on there, and pretty easy peasy. So the final result is just a really simple cart. When I was trying to figure out how I wanted to make it, I had considered putting a nice walnut top on it like I did for this recycling bin. But I just decided that sometimes you need to realize exactly what you're making. I'm making a storage unit that's going to go behind a door that nobody else is going to see. So I decided not to use some of the nicer resources for this simple project, and it's going to be functional and work out very well for our needs. Thanks for watching, and I hope that maybe this helped inspire you to just try making something. Doesn't have to be anything special, but the more you start building, the more you're going to develop your skills, and the sooner you'll be able to make the things that you dream of making. Have a nice day.